Hey, DDD. Thank you. I've spoken at so many events over the past few days, and throw in a little bit of jet lag, and the voice has trouble. But thank you for the amplification, gentlemen. This works. Can you hear me in the back? Good. Because, how would you otherwise hear my question, So I want to talk about something deeply uplifting, something utterly inspiring, just before lunch. The organizers have asked me to discuss with you and talk with you about why things go wrong, about disasters and big failures in and off complex systems. Now, in order to do that, and do that fruitfully, colleagues, we need to look over the horizon. We need to look across to some other domains. We need to look outside of our own domain to understand some of the patterns and some of the lessons that other domains have learned for us. And in a sense, I come from these other domains and speak with you in all humility, and yet want to impart some of these lessons that we have learned and paid for in lots of blood. The patterns are applicable to us and you. Complex systems fail actually in interesting and particular ways. And one of the claims I'm going to make, and I want you to keep stable throughout this talk, is that in order to crack that, rather than hunting for failure, rather than trying to control failure, we need to get better at understanding how success is created. Because success not only allows us to enhance the capacities that make it so, success and our understanding of it and what creates success in any complex system, including the ones that you help develop, success takes us to the place of spectacular failures. Counting errors and trying to control failures doesn't do that. That's a claim I'm going to make. I'm going to show some evidence for that and then explain how we might do that. In a sense, I'm picking up where Dave Snowden left off, all right? And so how do we do this in complex systems, prevent them from drifting into failure? So these are some of the domains that I've worked in. These are, in fact, accidents that I've had an active role in the aftermath of, not in the creation of, but in the aftermath of. You'll see planes and trains, and there's a nurse. And so these domains, as I said, pay their lessons in blood. And again, the pattern repeats itself quite nicely. But what's interesting is, so I try to understand what goes on here, right? And then I write lots of books about it, and which, if you haven't read them, it's okay, because I haven't read them either. Okay. Although, check that. The publisher recently said that I should do audiobooks because nobody reads anything anymore. So, okay, people still listen. They like being talked to in a very visual world. And so we did audiobooks. And so they said, well, we can get an actor, but it's much nicer to get you in the studio and have the author read. That's much more authentic. And so now I know how long it takes to read my bloody book. It's books. So a couple of them are already audiobooks. So you can listen to them on the way to work or during your jog, if you so please. My wife just indulged me. She's a scientist, and she fell asleep. So what can I say? But I'm very happily married. I'm not for my books. All right. So because nobody reads anything anymore, we also decided to make a movie. So this is the Safety Differently film that explains a little bit about how failure happens and how it can be stopped, for that matter, in complex systems. So that's freely available on YouTube. So you're welcome to look at that. It's half an hour. I'll show you a very brief clip out of it, in part because of something that Dave Snowden challenged us with, right? What is a safe-to-fail way to find out where and how we can push these complex systems? We're going to get there. All right. First, another one of Dave Snowden's ideas, and this is, of course, consistent both mathematically and theoretically and technically when it comes to complex systems. You cannot understand them by trying to study them as if you're not part of them. In fact, that would be an ontological impossibility anyway. We are part of the complex system. And so if you think you can understand a complex system by sort of hovering above it, you have two options. One, you're God, and two, the system is actually not complex. All right? And so in this case, I joined the complex system. There was a voice. I joined the complex system and learned to fly after becoming a professor on a 737. And you know what the advantages of being a pilot? you're always the first at the scene of the accident. All right? And I think you guys share that when, you've developed something and, you're going live. Guess who's first at the scene of the failure? Right? That's you. Or whichever poor soul gets to push that button. But then, of course, global financial crisis, airline goes bankrupt, and I stop flying, but I still fly other things. Now, in this world, by being part of the complex system, one of the things that we learned rather quickly was that counting and trying to control failure only gets you so far. And then, what do you guys do? So, now I don't know, this claim, right, and the status of this claim, 31 days without this mishap. So I'm old enough to have done C++ in grad school. This is impossible. You cannot do that for 31 days, right? It's just, anybody succeed in 31 days in this language without, I rest my case, Your Honor, right? So this is a lie, right? It's an aspiration, it's a hope, it may be prayer, please, right? But I don't know. It's, it gets cuter still, right? So you have these happy, crappy faces go, oh, we have 0 days without errors, and they celebrate the absence of negatives, as if any of that has any predictive capacity for things going spectacularly wrong. This is a grand illusion, a grand illusion. Counting the absence of negatives is not a predictor of how things are going to go wrong, all right? And I want you to remember that, because if this is happening in your business, I've seen this in a real estate site, I've seen this in various developed sites where people, particularly in operations, love counting error-free days, and it predicts nothing. In fact, it only sponsors the hiding of evidence of things going wrong. All right? It creates a culture of risk secrecy. And cultures of risk secrecy in any community very quickly become dumb cultures. They don't allow the boss to hear bad news. They don't allow themselves to learn. All right? I'd rather have a culture of risk competence than a culture of risk secrecy. All right? And so to be risk competent, you have to understand how things can go wrong. And so putting downward pressure on honesty and openness and disclosure about what goes wrong is a really bad idea. We're going to talk more about that this afternoon in room 10 at 14:30 if you want to join me for that. All right, so this is a bad idea. I'm going to show you why and how that works out in some other worlds. So let me give you an example of a place where people die. This is a chemical plant. This is a company that has elevated the idea of trying to reduce negatives as if it would say something about their potential for spectacular failure to religion. DuPont has done this like no one else. And the irony of that approach is here for all to see, all right? So here's 2 guys walking out, so one runs the plant, the other's a spokesperson. They run out to talk to the media about a gas release that just killed 4 people. So 4 guys are dead. 2 of them are brothers, all right? So it's a little town just near Houston, and 2 brothers are dead, right? And 2 others. So one family's got to organize 2 funerals in a week. It's not a good week. But the irony is there for everybody to see, because what are they actually telling their people to do when they come on site? Reduce errors by taking extra precaution when driving or walking, right? You see it announced on the sign. But that's not what killed their people at all. It's a gas release that killed their people, right? Nobody got killed or maimed or hurt or got their life changed by walking or driving on that site. It's this misguided idea about the broken windows theory, right? That you can, if you fix the broken windows and make everything look really buffed up and beautiful and have no errors and absolutely no indications of anything wrong, you will reduce the murder rate in New York dramatically. That's not how it works, all right? Because one doesn't predict the other. In fact, you could argue quite forcefully on the basis of the evidence that the absence of negatives predicts that a spectacular failure is much more likely to happen. And so this is a great example, right? Do you know that, so Macondo, right? Deepwater Horizon. 6 years of no errors, of no incidents, of nobody getting hurt on this boat. It was a boat, basically, all right? You got 126 people working on this thing, all right? 6 years of no one getting hurt. Now, just think about this for a moment, right? So I have a scientist wife. I said this already. I have 3 children, and thank the Lord I don't have pets because it would get worse. Now, and I have a house. 6 years without an injury, incident, anything going wrong. People, I can't keep my house incident-free for a week with 3 kids, right? So somebody is doing really smart things with the numbers, right? And they get the dumber for it, right? 6 years of hurting and causing absolutely no trouble, and all of a sudden you blow things up and kill 11 people, pulverize them, nowhere and never to be found again. This is the risk. When we focus, when we obsess on reducing negatives, when we obsess about making error and incidents and things like that go away, we make ourselves deeply vulnerable to the Big Bang. All right, let me give you another example. So the cynicism that this creates in workplaces like that is obvious, right? I'll leave this unsaid, but it gets cuter still. No, it hasn't. Right? And so cynicism is great, as Dave already alluded to. But yet, this is perhaps not really productive work time, right? But it also indicates, because this is not their home printer. You know, they did this, so you're paying for this. This also indicates the cynicism and the resignation relative to counting progress by the absence of negatives, right? Not a good way to do it. Lots of statistics, because they're from MIT, so they have to look very smart. But what they showed, and as a pilot this is interesting to know, that the airline with the highest incident rate actually has the lowest passenger mortality risk. So the more incidents we cause as pilots, the greater the chance that you actually survive as a passenger. Isn't that interesting, right? And you have to make all kinds of transitions in the head how that might be, right? And the culture word, right, that Dave sneered at, and rightfully so, because it's abused in so many ways, probably might have something to do with that. But we can discuss that more this afternoon. So I'll say that again. The more incidents, the lower the risk of dying. All right, the lower the risk of actually causing spectacular failure. Now, let me take you to a place where this was worked out quite nicely and gave us some insights that I think are very helpful. And again, latch on to what Dave was setting us up for this morning. This is a hospital. We either have been there or will be there at some point. As Dave also said, he has been in various configurations. Now, this hospital hurt 1 in 13 of their patients by giving them care. All right, that's not cool, and yet it is quite typical. So you come to be fixed up, and actually you go out worse, or you die. And so, or the wrong limb gets taken off, or all kinds of things might happen. You might find something in your body that's not supposed to be there. And so the variety of error in this world is huge. 1 in 13. Now, they threw a lot of resources at understanding that one. They had, for a hospital particularly, a relatively well-developed incident investigation program. All right, so people would go in and try to understand why this one went wrong. And what they typically found was this list of human deficiencies. All right, so we have human errors, whatever that might be. We have guidelines that are not followed. We have communication failures. We have miscalculations, right? The decimal point goes in the wrong place when you put a drug into somebody. We have procedural violations. And so I was quite intrigued with this list. And I said, so what are you trying to do about it? What is the countermeasure that you guys have? Well, you're probably not surprised. If this is how you understand failure to be caused in your system, then you want to make these things go away, because then failure won't be caused. That's relatively a simple corollary. But so what did they do? Well, they would conclude their investigation reports with something like this, right? Just tell the others to try a little harder to not have this happen to them. Or they would declare a war on error, right? We don't want to see error. 0 error-free days, right? Or they would send in the auditors. right? And so these are typical approaches to try to squash evidence of the negative. These are typical approaches to make the negatives go away, to make things look better, to hopefully avert things from going badly wrong, if you're that 1 in 13. But then we asked, okay, fair enough, but what about the other 12? How do you know that they go right? And in fact, do you know why they go right? And the answer was, nope. We have no idea. We don't know why these other 12 go right. Probably because of the absence of all this bad stuff. All right? So because people don't make errors, and they don't make miscalculations, and they don't miscommunicate, and they follow all the rules like Boy Scouts, and all the protocols are adhered to, and then things will go right. And so we have to invest in education and indoctrination and make sure that we declare that war on error. And they said, well, have you tested that? No, how could you, right? Well, in fact, how could you? You go native into that system. All right, so we did this for many weeks with a whole bunch of people, trying to understand why things go right and how they go right. You know what we found? In the 12 that go right, out of the 13, the 12 that go right, you know what we see? We see human errors. We see guidelines not followed. We see communication errors. We see miscalculations. We see procedures that aren't followed. And this is not very strange. You know, take a ward nurse. A colleague of mine did this research. He says 600 rules. Then we stopped counting. So a nurse has got to follow 600 rules every day. He or she works on the ward. All right. How many does he or she know? Between 2 and 3. And yet, you can't say that people die because of that, right? They might know some of the others, but are unable to produce them, right? Reproduce them, as Dave already said. You know, you can probably write down 10% of what you know. Well, this is even less than 10%. But the rest is not relevant, right? You take care of patients. You're not there to follow rules. You're there to help people heal. That's your job. So this is not very surprising. I didn't find it very surprising. But then, of course, it raises the really interesting question. If this doesn't discriminate between what goes right and what goes wrong, between the 1 that becomes a failure and the 12 that go well, if this doesn't discriminate between that, then what does? Then what does? And so this is where we had to do some really hard work. What we found was that it wasn't the absence of these negatives that determined the difference between failure and success in this complex system. It was the presence of positive capacities. Capacities really that have everything to do with adaptation, which is necessary to survive in any complex system, as you know, to make it resilient. And these were some of the ones that we found the most evidence of. One was the ability to say stop. Stop. Even in the face of acute production pressures, even in the face of an acute launch deadline, right? Even in the face of someone who is saying, we have to proceed, we have to proceed, we have to proceed, and I'm senior to you. That ability to say stop was critical in shifting the 12 from the 1. The next one we found, and this is utterly consistent with what Dave said this morning, teams and people who didn't take past success as a guarantee of future safety were the ones that belonged to the 12. All right, remember Dave talking about playing football out in the field and then in the living room, right? You replicate the success in a different context, and you're going to get a spectacular failure as a result. Lots of things are going to break, right? Working inside of a complex system, teams that have the capability of addressing that and saying, well, hang on, yeah, yesterday it went well with this sort of patient, but now we've got a slightly different da-da-da, right? So an acknowledgement of contextual subtleties and nuances and messy details that differ just a little bit, and not assuming that doing the same thing that you did yesterday will lead to success today. That team ended up in the 12, not in the 1. And then there's some corollaries to that. You know, one was certainly the idea of diversity of opinion and the ability for dissent. Now, often we think about diversity, and this is not unimportant at all, right? We think about diversity as a feature of the person, male, female, ethnicity, and all of that is good in terms of problem-solving capacities, right? It's the idea of requisite variety, obviously, right, Ashby. But the interesting thing is we notice that what is even more important is diversity in terms of professional background and psychological makeup, right? Those types of diversity help solve problems in ways that bring new ideas to the table, that allow people to say, stop, hang on, from my perspective, that would actually not work, right? And so teams that were able to introduce that and be open-minded and humble in the face of it were the teams that ended up in the 12 rather than the 1. And finally, teams that kept the discussion about risk alive, even in cases where everything looked hunky-dory, right, were the ones that belonged to the 12. How do you keep a discussion about risk alive? You ask double-checking questions by acknowledging your own fallibility, by saying, I'm not sure, but have we, double-checked? Now, there's a balance there because you don't want to be too safe, right? Some of you might have been in the car with someone who is too safe, which feels riling and actually unsafe, right? And roundabouts become just, it doesn't work, right? Because they never enter. And so keeping a discussion about risk alive, given the context, is an important capacity to have, but one that needs to be balanced with both the social harmony of the team and the production goals of the system. So those were some of the capacities. Now, you may, in your world, when thinking about this, come up with other examples and say, well, hang on, I've seen this capacity that really worked, right? People to deal with caffeine, for example, in whatever it might be in a particular setting. But this list is not exclusive, right? And not exhaustive yet. So have a think about that. So Eric Holnagel, a colleague of mine, says, look, there's a numeric argument for trying to understand why things go well. Right? I hope I've just shown some empirical data that suggests we should be understanding why things go well rather than understanding why they go wrong. But Eric says, because much more goes right than goes wrong, there's much more to be learned. There's simply more data. It's stupid to not look at that data. And so this is not a 1 in 13 world, this is a slightly safer world, but much more goes right than goes wrong. So let's not forget to look at that. I would want to make another argument. And in fact, Abe Wold has made it for me. So is there anybody who knows who Abe Wold is, or was, rather? Yeah. So today, Abraham Wold is known as the father of operations research, right, the branch of systems engineering. In 1943, he was asked to come to the Western Front in England and be based at some of the air bases there that were doing missions over Germany. Missions over Germany were risky, particularly in 1943. They became less risky as the war went on because air superiority increased on part of the Allies, as you probably know. At the same time, they started flying further and deeper into territory as well. But these were risky missions. Right? The scrub rate of a pilot might have been 20 days, 23 days, until you were dead, basically. And so rotating in and out of this was always risky business. Now, given that high scrub rate, not only are the human losses enormous, and never mind the ethical implications of what it is that they were doing over Germany, but coming back, these airplanes had holes in them, all right? So holes, like holes in cheese, right? And these holes suggested risk. And the question was, and these holes were of course caused by the Flugabwehrkanonen, right, flak, and by air-to-air fire. The question to Abe was, we want to put some extra armor on these airplanes to increase the probability of these guys making it alive back across the channel. And Abe said, okay, but he wasn't a pilot, but I'm a pilot, and putting armor on an airplane sounds like a singularly bad idea. Right? You don't want to make these things heavier than they need to be. And armor cuts into range and payload, right? And so this is not a good idea. So you want to be very judicious about where you put it. And so Abe says, well, okay, I'm really good at statistics, all right? What I'll do is I'll try to figure out where's the most profitable place to put the armor on these airplanes. So it took him a few months, all right, all of this done by hand. And he comes up with a solution. And say his commanders, so we're going to put the armor, of course, in the places where the holes are most likely to show up, right? Because that's the most vulnerable place. And he says, Nein, we need to put the armor where there are no holes, because those are the ones that don't make it back. We need to put the armor where there's no holes, because those are the ones that don't make it back, right? Having been born in Brisbane, just outside of Amsterdam on the other side here, and growing up, at least the first 20 years in this country, we're poldering, as the Dutch do, right? And what do we find? We find the ones that didn't make it back, right? That plunged into lakes with holes in them. Put the armor in the place where there's no holes, because those are the ones that don't make it back. Now, what's the analogy to that lesson to our world? What's the analogy of learning how to understand, of learning where the armor should go, which is not where you see indications of failure and small holes? All right? Let me show you an example to make that clear. So here's Nick. Let me introduce you to Nick, because I think Nick illustrates this quite nicely. So Nick works in a world that Dave Snowden would say is overly constrained. He's wearing a hard hat, he's put high vis on, right? He's somewhere in the Australian outback, which is a place nobody wants to work except people from the Midlands, which is where Nick is from, the English Midlands. And so they probably have no idea what they're signing up for, right? And they didn't 200 years ago either, probably, but there you go. So he's working there. He's wearing a hard hat. I don't see anything in the picture that could fall on his head, okay? Except for the beams, but he's not going to walk underneath them. Why would he, right? And so I think the Old Norse myth is still alive, right? That the sky will one day fall, right? And at least Nick has his head protected against that. But he's in this heavily constrained world. Why? Because Nick is being told by a system that investigated all the holes and said, oh, but we had a trip, and we had a fall, we had a slip, and we had a cut finger and a sprained back, and so we give you all these procedures because we're going to fill all these holes in order for that no longer to happen. And now Nick has to wear the hard hat in an open field and a high visibility vest or blouse or shirt. The only thing that can run into him is a fellow worker. You know, there's nothing that actually prevents him from being seen in that bright sunlight. And so heavily constrained because some bureaucracy, right, decided that it was a good idea to fill all the holes, because that's what they counted. Look, 6 years without any holes showing up, right? The other thing that you see is that Nick's got a lot of stickers on his hard hat. Right? These are, again, the result of all kinds of holes that needed to be filled, not in the hard hat, but in the procedures and the processes of this company. And they allow Nick to do certain things that only he can do. Others can't, right? Reach into certain places, provide first aid, do all kinds of other things, work in confined spaces. Again, these are all holes that were filled on the basis of discoveries made about how things could go slightly wrong. But then there's another sticker on the back of his head, and on the back of his hard hat, which is slightly difficult to see because he just turned his head as I was making the picture, but it's over there, and it says GSD. So I'm walking next to a colleague at Nick's. He's a foreman, by the way, and I'm saying, so what's this GSD? What does that mean? What does it stand for? Oh, mate, you know, GSD, that just means get stuff done. And he didn't say stuff, all right? When you're in the outback, you don't say stuff. That's on the back of his head. And I found that quite intriguing. In order to get stuff done in that world, in that heavily constrained world, remember what Dave said this morning, you have to find your workarounds. Now, I find that a problematic label because it suggests that somebody's right and somebody's wrong, and you have to go around the ones who are right by doing something that's subversive. That's not how adaptive capacity looks, in my opinion, right? He gets stuff done every day because either he can surrender to all the constraints put on him in all the rules and procedures and clothing and radio around his neck, or he can actually get stuff done. It's a hard choice. Driving a 737, same thing. Either you surrender to all the constraints and rules and obligations that rest upon you, or you fly the damn jet, right? And this is true for every job. There's always this gap between how some bureaucrats imagine the work to be done and possibly held to all the rules and how work actually gets done. Nick is honest about it and posts it on the back of his head. Now, if I want to understand in this system where there are no more holes, because they've all been patched up, where Nick is going to die or kill his fellow workers, I need to see his successes. How does he get stuff done? Because if he gets stuff done, There's going to be sacrifices. He's not going to do some things because if he does everything that he needs to do, he won't get stuff done. And so something has to give. What gives? And in 20 plus, 25 years of studying this, studying work, most places where people make those sacrifices don't matter, right? They're not important. Remember the nurse, 600 rules. They know 2 or 3, right? Those they won't sacrifice. The rest are much less important. So Nick will take me to the place, both of success, but also where spectacular failures might happen. Now, how do we set Nick's capacity free? How do we set his adaptive capacity free? So the experiment was done actually in this country, in the north of this country. This is a heavily constrained system, right? Which is not in this country. This is in that country where Dave proudly announces that everybody drives on the wrong side of the road. And in order to make sure that still goes right, look at what they have to do, right? I mean, it's go there, no, go there, no, stop, no, go, you gotta give away. I don't know to whom, because you can't go in, but never mind, So the utter contradictions are there for all to see. And in some sense, this is Nick's world, right? You either follow all the rules, or you drive the damn car, right? Because you can't do both. It is fundamentally and logically impossible. This goes for your world as well, by the way, but you know this, right? So what did Monderman do in Drachten, right? In the little village in the north of this country, he said, you know what? Let's take everything out. That's not what he did. This was the Asian solution to this problem, by the way. Speaking of a heavily constrained system. No, says Monderman, this is the Dutch solution. We take everything out. We set people's adaptive capacity free. This square, all right, this square, which features in the film, by the way, this square was heavily constrained by all the traditional means. Signs, lights, everything, all right? You go here. You only can go get this fast. You need to give way to this person. You go first. No, you go first, right? And I will tell you, right? So from top down, God's eye view determines what people do, imposed from the top down onto the square. 10 pretty bad accidents per year and massive gridlock, all right? 20,000 cars a day. This square just didn't move at all, all right? So lots of problems. How do we resolve this? Monderman says, you know what? We're going to take everything out. We just pave it with brick and make it uniform, and people can sort it out themselves. Now that is an example. And in some sense, if you have time, take a train to Drachten. Oh, you can't take a train. Take a train to Hogeveen or something, then a bus. Beautiful place, and you will see self-organization in practice, all right? It's a gorgeous, in fact, behind the central station in Amsterdam, you got the same thing, except there's no cars. But then again, you have like 50 million bikes a day, so it's pretty self-organizing as people come off the boats across the A. And you probably have seen this, and otherwise, go there, it's closer. This self-organization, interestingly, introduces or reintroduces a particular kind of humanity, and certainly an embodiment of complex systems, right? People try to read each other's intentions, right? Are you going to go first? Am I going to go first, right? And really interesting, and this was not in the model of prediction, they adapt to the slowest user in the square at the time, right? So the little old lady in that photo determines the speed of all other users until she's reached the other side, right? So this blue van, until they've passed the old lady, is not going to go faster than she. Nobody tells them to do that. There is no top-down rule telling them this. There is no radar, there's no police, there's no, that's adaptive capacity, co-adaptation, and in some sense, self-organization, right? Beautiful, complex system. Now that's nice, and I would make the argument that, you can throw a chaos monkey into a system like this, and it'll just go, yeah, we'll just keep doing what we're doing, right? Throw a chaos monkey into this, and you get massive chaos, right? Throw a chaos monkey into this, and the resilience and self-adaptation of this system will make it survive, right? Now, for the record, that's not an official chaos monkey, but it looks like one, right? So I think if you send that into the square, you get an interesting effect. But all right, so before we go there, let's think about how we can safely do that, right? Because just taking everything out and seeing what's going to happen takes a leap of faith, all right? It takes a serious leap of faith. And in some sense, there may be unanticipated consequences, as Dave told us, and this is very true. We'll finish on that after the film. But how do you do that safely? So what we did we micro-experimented in a real-world setting. There's a fantastic opportunity to micro-experiment with taking everything out, setting adaptive capacity free, in order to make sure that we understood and enhanced people's ability to create success, and no longer fussed about closing all the holes and hunting for the failures. No. How is success created, and how can we do that safely in the micro-experiment? Here we go.
So some people, of course, ask me, Woolworths, but it's a supermarket chain. Well, how do these guys have anything to do with safety? Well, you'd be surprised. They have a high frequency of incidents and lots of strangers on their sites, which presents very, very specific challenges. So I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of their executives, right? And I'm doing a little learning lab, and I'm showing this picture of the shared space, that square. And so they look at this square, and one of those executives, he all of a sudden pipes up and says, what if we do that? And the other guys look at him and go, what do you mean? And he says, what if we take everything out? What would happen to safety in our stores then?
At the moment, within the supermarket brand, we manage from a national level. Ideas are generated, concepts are pulled together and then pushed down.
From my perspective, there's monthly checks such as checking ice build-ups in the freezer cauldron, or whether the racking is packed safely. Look, these are things that should be done on a daily basis anyway. So to be prompted by National to do that is, I don't think it adds particular value to the store.
Their model had run into trouble as well. More imposition of bureaucracy and compliance didn't improve their numbers at all. They were screaming for something different. This is the Woolworths experiment. We divided a bunch of stores up into three conditions, or three groups. In one group, we left things as they were. Then we took a group of stores where we took everything out. Of course, there had been a lot of conversations with the regulator preceding the experiment, like 18 months worth of it, and that was necessary as well as ethical clearance. And then in a third condition, not only was everything taken out, but the people involved in these stores were given some training about safety differently, safety 2, ideas about how to do safety differently.
As a team, we identified two key areas.
The main risk for a customer is a slip on the floor. One of the most common ways a customer can slip is by a simple small grape.
The results are really quite interesting. They show that the third condition generates the best results. That group of stores had the lowest safety incidents. They had the best results when it comes to ownership and engagement and locus of control and leadership.
It was fantastic. Being able to just work with your team safety-wise was awesome. Didn't have someone telling you exactly what to say to them. Could use our own words and things like that, so it was really good.
It just became something that the team spoke about. I saw instances of a non-management team correcting other staff.
This is not just about safety. What do you have when you have people who are engaged? I think these people will want to stay. These are not people who rotate through your business in 6 months and go, because it is their thing, it's their baby, it's their business.
Now, you might go, yeah, that's really cute in retail, right? Not much can go wrong. Although, as I said, a lot can actually go wrong, and it can cost them a lot of money as well. Lots of lessons were learned from this micro-experiment, but one of the most important ones was the possibility to do this in a safe-to-fail way. To get ethics clearance, 18 months of negotiations with the regulators, various regulators, about 14 of them, and also, of course, the University Ethics Committee, which took even more persuasion. But what, you're gonna take safety procedures away? Oh my word! But the results, as I said, were quite interesting. What wasn't in the model was the fact that the case in which people were given full autonomy and unleashed adaptive capacity, the second one, actually generated some really good things. But the third one, where we unleashed adaptive capacity, but then talked about, with these groups, about how things could be done differently, was was the more powerful one. Freedom within that frame certainly contributed to some really interesting solutions. The results now are replicated across 1,000 stores, right? So 1,000 sites. And I think that's the message of a micro-experiment. Safe to fail, we could pull the plug any moment, day or night, if we had the indications that anything that went wrong was related to the experiment. And that safeguard had to be in there for ethics as well. But that experiment creates evidence from the inside out. You don't have to believe someone's word. You don't have to take it on ideology or principle. You create the data yourself as a business. But you do it in a small, randomized control, in this particular case, way so that you can generate reliable and valid evidence. Now, the final one is, what about the unintended consequences? And if you set adaptive capacity free, what about drifting away from goodness? What about drifting into failure? I'm going to show an example just to think about this and to reinforce the points I've been trying to make. So this is a country that's officially bankrupt on the picture, if it weren't for German euros. And this is sort of the plane I flew, though the one I flew at even longer wings. It would probably take out the traffic light. And the sheer design of this airport probably violates 1,500 EU rules to begin with. But the runway blasts into the distance here behind the bus, right? Which means that if you line up with your jet and you give takeoff power, you don't want to be the dude on that little scooter, all right? Because you're not going to be sitting on it anymore. So now, the issue is that this is a relatively constrained system, all right? And it gets even more so because there's hills around it, all right? So here's the approach plate, the airport plate, not the approach plate, the airport plate, that we use to navigate on the surface of this airport. And so I think you can guess what that big black thing would be in the middle, right? Now, that is not a pedestrian overpass, okay? That would probably be a bad idea on an airport. So you come in, say runway 17. So here's the Mediterranean Sea. It's all around, okay? And so the Dutch would go, yeah, so we drain the thing, right? We do this for a living. And they probably, they have history on their sides because it didn't used to be a sea. It actually was not a sea until something broke and it filled itself, but from the Atlantic. But but suppose you're not Dutch, okay? And poldering is not the option here. It's heavily constrained, as I said, because Greece, this is Greece, it's got lots of mountains, all right? So, and rock, rock, paper, scissors, all right? So in airplane talk, it's rock, aluminium, all right? And so rock always wins. Aluminium never wins, okay? And so you want to have clearance to fly over those obstacles, which is why this bar is there. You have to actually fly over that bar, which is a white line painted on the tarmac, overfly that thing to land. All right, makes sense because you don't want to come in so low as to hit the rocks if you want to put wheels to the tarmac there, which would be nice, but you can't. Well, you can, but you're not supposed to. The issue is there's no taxiway beyond Charlie, right? So there's a C, Charlie taxiway, right, which is really nice, but there's no taxiway beyond it. So if you overshoot Charlie, you got to taxi all the way down the runway. There's a little turning circle, and then go back up, and then pull into your parking spot. So the issue is airplanes on the ground cost money. Airplanes in the air make you money. This is why turnaround times have become increasingly squeezed with even the majors, right? Turnaround times are expensive. And so up, make us money, get off the ground. The issue is in Southern Europe, I used to ask, to the dispatcher walking up to the airplane when we landed, and pulled into the parking spot. I used to ask, so which would you like, the bodies or the bags? And they go, ¿qué? Because there's no way they can do both in 25 minutes. That's an illusion, right? And so, again, something has to give, get stuff done, all right? In this case, how do we resolve this particular problem? So we have a significant crunch on this system, right? I need to overfly this. I need to land beyond that displaced threshold, to use a technical term. But I really want to pull off a Charlie because I don't want to taxi all the way down. I mean, that's like 7-8 minutes, and in a turnaround of 20, 25, that's a lot of minutes. And so we don't have that luxury. So what's the predictable behavior that you get? How do people create success? This is how you create success. This is not photoshopped. And the other thing is that traffic light is merely coincidentally red, right? This is Greece. The only well-coordinated system in Greece is the family, all right? And so you don't think that's funny at all, okay. But the light is red out of sheer coincidence. Otherwise, the bus would have had skid marks on its roof. But so this person, these pilots, will probably make Charlie, I think, and they can turn around inside of their 25 minutes without an issue, right? Now, many countries solve this in different ways. I mean, to Ouagadougou, which is the capital of Burkina Faso, which doesn't have a fence. Solve it, no fence. You can't hit the fence. At our airport, no, you cannot hit the fence. Don't have one. And so the question is this going to be an incident? Are these guys going to, guys, I say guys, that's gendered, likely two guys, given the division of gender in this airline. These two pilots, are they going to report this as an incident? Is this going to show up as a whole in some bureaucrat's counting system of how many incidents we've had? No. These are just getting their work done. And next time they fly here, which might be that very afternoon, again, they'll do the same thing. And in fact, they'll be part of a system of informal teaching, which you guys have as well. Sorry, that's gendering it, which you people have as well, right? Which is, here, let me show you how it's done. Oh, but isn't that the official? No, it's not. Let me show you how it's done, right? And in this case, and be very concrete, what you do is you take the left windscreen, and you see the screws in the windscreen? Yeah, I see the screws. Okay, so take the third screw from the bottom, line that screw up with a little light on the back end of the terminal building, and keep that line of sight really, really nicely, and then you just squeak across the fence right there. Right? But that's not the official approach. The official approach, right? Do you want to land this thing in Libya? Is that where you're going? Right? So we have all kinds of social ways, as do you, to squeeze productive capacity out of the system, right? And this is one of them. Now, when does this drift into failure? I actually don't know. But the thing is, if you want to learn anything of value, counting your negatives is not going to give it to you. If you want to learn anything of value about where spectacular failures might happen, there's only one place to look, and that is in how success is created. Because this is how success is created. This is how success is created despite the constraints we put people under. This is how success is created despite the obligations that we think we've given them. This is how success is created. And it is in the creation of success and our understanding of it that we can get wiser about how systems might spectacularly fail. Thank you very much.